When the United Kingdom declared war on Nazi Germany in September 1939 at the start of World War II, the UK controlled to varying degrees numerous crown colonies, protectorates in the Indian Empire. It also maintained unique political ties to 4 of the 5 independent dominions, Australia, Canada, South Africa, and New Zealand as co-members, with the UK, of the then British Commonwealth. In 1939 the British Empire and the Commonwealth together comprised a global power, with direct or de facto political and economic control of 25% of the world's population, and of 30% of its land mass. The contribution of the British Empire and Commonwealth in terms of manpower and materiel was critical to the Allied war effort. From September 1939 to mid-1942, the UK led Allied efforts in multiple global military theaters. Commonwealth, colonial and imperial Indian forces, totaling close to 15 million serving men and women, fought the German, Italian, Japanese and other Axis armies, air forces and navies across Europe, Africa, Asia, and in the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic, Indian, Pacific, and Arctic Oceans. Commonwealth forces based in Britain operated across northwestern Europe in the effort to slow or stop Axis advances. Commonwealth air forces fought the Luftwaffe to a standstill over Britain, and Commonwealth armies defeated Italian forces in East Africa and North Africa and occupied several overseas colonies of German-occupied European nations. Following successful engagements against Axis forces, Commonwealth troops invaded and occupied Libya, Italian Somaliland, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and Madagascar. The Commonwealth defeated, held back or slowed the Axis powers for 3 years while mobilizing its globally integrated economy, military, and industrial infrastructure to build what became, by 1942, the most extensive military apparatus of the war. These efforts came at the cost of 150,000 military deaths, 400,000 wounded, 100,000 prisoners, over 300,000 civilian deaths, and the loss of 70 major warships, 39 submarines, 3,500 aircraft, 1,100 tanks and 65,000 vehicles. During this period the Commonwealth built an enormous military and industrial capacity. Britain became the nucleus of the Allied war effort in Western Europe, and hosted governments in exile in London to rally support in occupied Europe for the Allied cause. Canada delivered almost $4 billion in direct financial aid to the United Kingdom, and Australia and New Zealand began shifting to domestic production. Clarification needed, to provide material aid to U.S. forces in the Pacific. Citation needed. Following the U.S. entry into the war in December 1941, the Commonwealth and the United States coordinated their military efforts and resources globally. As the scale of the U.S. military involvement and industrial production increased, the U.S. undertook command in many theaters, relieving Commonwealth forces for duty elsewhere, and expanding the scope and intensity of Allied military efforts. Cooperation with the Soviet Union also developed. However, it proved difficult to coordinate the defense of far-flung colonies and Commonwealth countries from simultaneous attacks by the Axis powers. In part this difficulty was exacerbated by disagreements over priorities and objectives, as well as over the deployment and control of joint forces. The governments of Britain and Australia, in particular, turned to the United States for support. Although the British Empire and the Commonwealth countries all emerged from the war as joint victors together with the USA, the USSR and the other allies, and the conquered territories were returned to British rule, the costs of the war citation needed, and the nationalist fervor that it had stoked became a catalyst for the decolonization which took place in the following decades.